I want to bring in with me here our legal analyst, Enrique Latoison. Enrique, fairly quick decision by this jury. We waited last year for 5 days, and then it was a hung jury. They could not reach a verdict. Today, guilty on all counts. What are your thoughts at this point?
Well, I can tell you right now, Jim, what's taking place right now is, they already polled the jury, and after they get done polling the jury, I will tell you that the prosecution in this case will make a pitch to have Mr. Cosby's bail revoked.
Right.
And they will pitch that to the judge. They'll say, Judge, he is now guilty of all 3 charges. He faces a minimum of 5 to 10 on each and every last charge. Now, there's no mandatory minimums on this case, but they'll ask for his bail to be revoked. And when that takes place, the defense will then, already prepared, will start to argue all the reasons why his bail should not be revoked. He's not a flight risk, his age, his blindness, his health, and things of that nature. So
give him time to get his affairs in order, that sort of thing, but the judge could say absolutely not. He could go to jail today from this courthouse.
He could go to jail today, right now. The bail could be revoked, the bail could be raised, and Mr. Cosby could be given an opportunity to post that bail. And then what will happen is they'll start a pre-sentence investigation. That pre-sentence investigation will take a couple months. It'll be the time for the court to do a mock-up of Mr. Cosby, his background, and everything about him, and then for them to make a recommendation on what his sentencing should be, and then they will come back for that sentencing.
So the sentence, it's a maximum of 10 years on each count, and there are 3 counts that he's been found guilty. The judge could decide concurrent sentences or consecutive sentences, which obviously would mean he would spend the rest of his life in prison.
That would be a life sentence for Mr. Cosby. The one thing that Mr. Cosby has going for him at this point, if you want to say that, is the fact that these are not mandatory minimum sentences. So the judge has discretion. The judge can sentence him to probation, he can sentence him to house arrest, or he can hammer him and say that I'm going to give you 5 to 10 years on each and every last count, which is 3 counts. So he could be doing a minimum of 15 to 30 years, which obviously is a life sentence for Mr. Cosby.
All right,
Go ahead, guys. What do you need?
Jim Rosenfield, Enrique Latoison, just want to jump in here because
I'm standing by outside the courthouse right now. Jim.
All right, Aaron, thanks. One of our producers was just talking in my ear as you were tossing it out to me. We are hearing that we will hear from the District Attorney, Kevin Steele, coming up at 3 o'clock. Of course, we'll bring that to you. We heard from the other side. We heard from Tom Messer, a very brief statement there, that they are very disappointed, but insisting the fight is not over. And when reporters asked, will you appeal, he said emphatically yes, very strongly. Those were his words just behind me as Bill Cosby left, standing with his defense attorneys and his spokesman, Andrew Wyatt. He did not say anything, but he did, as you saw him leaving the court, raise his hand in the air. He was asked by reporters, are you prepared to go to prison? A sobering thought for him, no doubt, at his age of 80. He did not respond, but the judge did take his age and his health into account during what was some rather heated back and forth with the district attorney who wanted Bill Cosby to be sent behind bars right now, today. He did not want him released on bail. He was arguing against that, but the judge said, I am not going to do that with a man of his age and his health. We know he has vision issues, and he walks with a cane, so the judge did grant him bail, but did say you must remain here in the Commonwealth, you must stay in your home, and you must also undergo some evaluation, which is normal procedure after a conviction like this. And then there will be moving into this sentencing phase. Enrique Latoison is here with me. Talk a little bit about the timing on this. How much time? There's some work to be done, right? Some documents that need to be prepared, some interviewing that needs to be done to gather information that will all weigh into what the judge decides as far as sentencing.
That's correct, Jim. This is going to take a couple months, and what's going to happen is during that time period, they will have Mr. Cosby meet with evaluators from the court, and those evaluators will evaluate Mr. Cosby. They will find out things about him. They usually do a psychosexual evaluation. They will do a violent sexual predator evaluation. Also during this time, his defense team will have the opportunity to have him, put together all kinds of things to talk about the things that he's done in the community, things to argue to the judge for sentencing. And while that's going on, the prosecution will have the same time to also come up with a sentencing memorandum. And during that time, of course, they'll be asking for jail time. The district attorney in this case was asking for him to be put in jail right now. He wanted his bail to be revoked now. I can guarantee you, after he has a couple months to put things together, all the kind of witness statements and things that he's going to have at his disposal, I'm very confident he's going to be asking for jail time.
So it's 3 counts, guilty counts, on aggravated indecent assault. Maximum of 10 years on each count. As we've mentioned earlier, as we watch Bill Cosby's SUV leaving the courthouse here, we know now he must return to his home in Cheltenham. The judge could decide concurrent or consecutive. And as you've just been discussing, all of these factors are going to weigh in, and we don't know yet what the date is for sentencing. We do know that until he is sentenced, he has to stay here in Pennsylvania and await his fate.
Absolutely.
There is no question he will spend some time behind bars.
Well, you know, that'll be up to the judge to decide when the time comes.
Will it?
I will want to make sure very clearly that he does have a situation where he's looking at Megan's Law. He's looking at a lifetime Megan's Law. This is a Tier 3 offense underneath the law, which means that he will have to report as a sex offender for the rest of his life.
We're just watching the SUV here leaving the Montgomery County Courthouse. Skyforce 10 is overhead. There's quite the scene here at the Montgomery County Courthouse. You heard earlier from Gloria Allred, who represents 3 of the 5 women who testified the other so-called bad acts, which the judge allowed in this second trial. We did not hear from that many women in the first trial, but this was allowed due to some court decisions that transpired between these two in the last year that allowed these 5 other women to take the stand and tell the jury their experience, their allegations about what Bill Cosby did and the use of medication to render them incapacitated. And Gloria Allred said that the Me Too movement is alive and well here in Montgomery County, because this second trial, of course, taking place after that explosion of the Me Too movement, where we've seen women coming forward in the Harvey Weinstein case, and it went viral on social media, #MeToo. So this outcome, very different, obviously, from the hung jury we saw last June, with that sort of Me Too movement as the umbrella over this case, and these other women having a chance to have a voice in court. We heard from them at the podium, very emotional for them. They feel vindicated. Bill Cosby had always denied the accusations and had, in court, in his defense, had claimed that he was being set up because he was a celebrity. Obviously, the jury in this case did not buy that.
I agree with you, Jim. They found him guilty of all charges. There were each subsections of these charges, and during those subsections, they could have found him guilty of some charges and not guilty of other charges. The timing of this case is much different than the first case. The Me Too movement was not a movement at the time he went to trial the first time. And actually, on the first trial, the judge said only 1 other bad prior act witness could testify. So you fast forward a year later, you're dealing with Ms. Constant plus 5 other witnesses. You're dealing with the Me Too movement and the way that that's come across the United States and the world, and you're saying to yourself, well, this is bad timing for Mr. Cosby to be facing these charges. But, the jury has spoken. They found him guilty, and that's their verdict.
We saw emotion sort of boiling over from Bill Cosby in court after the verdict was read. There were points during this trial where he would smile, and prosecutors would call him out for that, especially in the closing. They said, this is not amusing, this is not funny, it's not something to smile about. Will the judge, and he had this outburst today when the district attorney was trying to say he has a plane, and Bill Cosby said, I don't have a plane, you expletive, directed at the district attorney. But in front of the judge, he has this outburst. Do you think that weighs at all into what happens next for Bill Cosby in terms of how the judge views him?
Well, I will guarantee you the prosecution will use that when they ask for his sentence and they ask for jail time. They're going to use that against him. But you got to remember, Mr. Cosby sat here now for 2 trials. courthouse and not testify. You know, obviously his attorneys in both cases decided it was not a good idea for him to testify, which was probably the right move. He would have subjected himself to cross-examination of all the witnesses. So in this particular case, he didn't testify. So, you know, he remains defiant. You see he put the fist up in the air as he's leaving the courthouse. You know, he had something to say to the DA. He had something to get off his chest. He obviously is still going to take that same view that he believes he's an innocent man, even though the jury has spoken. They have found him guilty. He's had a trial. They found him guilty. And, of course, the district attorney's office is going to say, listen, here's a man without remorse. He sat there and called me a name in the middle of the court after just being found guilty.
What life becomes very different for him now, right? What are the rules that he has to live by until sentencing?
Well, he's going to have to maintain and follow the bail conditions. That's the most important thing. The judge says he has to stay at home. He's not allowed to travel. He had to turn over his passport. He's going to have to follow those conditions very carefully. If he steps out of line, you can believe the district attorney's office is going to file a petition to have him immediately bail revoked and be incarcerated in prison. Now he's also a convicted sex offender at this point. Life's going to be different. His legacy obviously is tarnished for life. He's going to be a registered sex offender, which means that he's going to have his picture taken, and you're going to be able to find it on the internet once you put in the zip code and know that Mr. Cosby lives in your area and he's a convicted sex offender. Life's never going to go back to what it was before this verdict.
How difficult is it, in your experience, to put these other women on the stand to come forward and testify in a court of law about what happened, what they allege happened to them? They obviously wanted to be able to do so. There were more women who wanted to come forward, but 5 of them did have the chance to testify on the stand. As an attorney, as a defense attorney, how do you prepare those people for what they're going to go through? Because they were vilified by the defense team. They were called names, and Gloria Allred referenced what they went through, especially in closing. The defense attorneys, had obviously derogatory things to say about these 5 women who came forward to share their experience, their allegations against Bill Cosby.
Well, one of the things we were talking about, Jim, from day one is how's the jury going to feel about the attacking of these victims in this case? Are they going to take it as this is witness shaming, this is victim shaming and attacking the witnesses? How's that going to play amongst the jury? Now, we know from early on that the defense in this case had a strategy, and that strategy was to go hard at them. They were calling them names, they were calling them con artists. Basically, the entire trial, they were putting them down. It was a kind of a different version of the first trial where they treated them a little differently as far as, the attacks. But the defense was all in. They were all in on that strategy, and that's what they did. Now, whenever you have a witness, no matter whether they're testifying for the prosecution or the defense, an attorney's going to get that person prepared. And in preparing that person, you're usually going to have someone simulate what the other side is going to do so that they have an idea of what to expect when they're on that stand being cross-examined.
Bill Cosby, as he was leaving this courthouse, he took the same path that he's taken not only in this trial, but in the last trial as well. We often heard from his spokesman who would speak on his behalf, who was defiant, who just yesterday said, we are confident that this jury is going to return a just verdict, if not guilty. Talk to me a little bit about what goes on outside the courtroom, why that may be seen as important for a defense team when we know the jury's not hearing any of that sort of colorful stuff that's going on outside the courtroom, but yet you're trying to sway the court of public opinion at the very same time. It's an interesting dynamic.
I mean, when you're all in, you're all in. At this point, even though he was found guilty, he is still going to be defiant. He's still going to take the position that he is a wrongfully prosecuted man. I think they said McCarthyism, lynch mob, and some of the things that the defense said in their closing. So when you look at that, you have a choice as a defendant that's been found guilty. You can immediately take the tone that you want to make amends, and you can apologize and say, I'm sorry, and I didn't mean for this to happen, and take some leniency on me. Or you can stay all in and say, I still didn't do it. I'm still an innocent man. And that's what their strategy has been. And, just that short walk coming out of the courthouse, the fist bump, the attorney saying that we strongly are going to appeal, they're not backing down on that strategy.
Let's talk about grounds for appeal, possible grounds for appeal. What do you expect that they would go for?
Well, you know, from the very beginning, you knew that the defense in this case was every single time making motions for mistrial.
Yes.
And what they were doing, Jim, was they were protecting the record. Each and every step of the way, they kept asking for a mistrial. They kept continuing to object to things. And each time that was making a record of that. So when they go to appeal, they can say to a higher court, these are all the things they believe the judge got wrong. The more things that you ask a judge to rule on, the more chances that a superior court may find the judge did some things wrong. I will tell you, one of the most important things that they're going to appeal is the amount of prior bad act witnesses that came in.
The 5 women that he allowed in this case.
5 women. You have the first case, you have Ms. Constant and 1 witness, and you have the same defendant. And then a year later, you have Ms. Constant and 5 women.
It was the judge's discretion as to how many he would allow, correct?
Absolutely. It was absolutely up to the judge.
And he chose these 5, or he allowed 5 as the number. And
Correct.
they could take issue with that.
They could take issue with that.
Why pile on? Why allow so many?
There was also some outbursts in the court. They asked for a mistrial on that. They asked for a mistrial, saying that originally in the beginning of the case, they said they thought the judge was biased because of his family or somebody that was involved with the Me Too movement. They have every step of the way preserved their objections for the record.
For those of you at home, you're just watching the larger box there on your screen of Bill Cosby. This is just moments ago when he left the courthouse after the guilty verdict, found guilty on 3 counts, and has been allowed to go home on bail to await sentencing. We expect that he, as the judge ruled, he must stay at home. We expect he will be here in Pennsylvania until he returns to court for any pre-sentencing hearings. Will there be many of those? Will he have to attend? And what's the time frame between sort of a guilty verdict that we see today and when we could expect the judge to be ready to rule on sentencing?
Well, Mr. Cosby definitely has to attend, first off, because he has to attend, because if the judge decides that he's going to listen to the prosecution and give him jail time, he will be taken into custody possibly on that day, or the judge will give him a chance to turn himself in. There's a statutory time within a couple months that this has to be done. Now, the defense can ask for a continuance to delay the sentencing if they believe there's certain things that they're still trying to present to the court, as far as their own evaluations, their own things that they're trying to present to the court, as far as witnesses and things of that nature. The defense in this chance gets the opportunity to put on almost a mini trial about sentencing, and get to argue to the judge all the reasons why Mr. Cosby should not be put in jail.
What can we expect would be brought up by the defense? Obviously, his age, his health. What else might be a factor?
I think they're also going to play into a fact about what would incarceration do at this point. What rehabilitation, his age. I know you just said that, but they're going to bring that in. That's a big part of this. He's already been found guilty, so the appeal process can't take place until after he's sentenced. So the most important thing right now for Cosby's team is to keep him from being incarcerated. And you can believe the prosecution, when they're putting on their mini trial at the sentencing, they're going to try to get as many of these witnesses as possible. I wouldn't be surprised if you didn't see 50 women here. The women have come up in the past that accused Mr. Cosby of the same thing. They're going to have an opportunity to speak, even though they weren't some of the prior bad act witnesses. Those people can still speak and talk about how it affected their lives, being, just done to them by Mr. Cosby.
On the other side, he has no prior convictions. So he has no record at this point.
We call that a prior record score of 0. He's got a prior record.
All right, just to bring you up to speed, we are awaiting a news conference from the District Attorney, Kevin Steele. We're also waiting to hear from Andrea Constant and her attorney. So that's supposedly coming up at about 3 o'clock, about 10 minutes from now. I know my colleagues Jacqueline London and Aaron Coleman are also with me here back in the NBC 10 studios as we watch that video now of Bill Cosby's SUV, which was heading back just a short time ago from the courthouse here in Norristown to his home, where he must remain per the judge's order until his sentencing. Jackie, Aaron.
All right.
Our big breaking news this afternoon here at home: Bill Cosby found guilty on all counts against him. That development in the last couple of hours. Welcome back to the Montgomery County Courthouse in Norristown. We're joined live now by our legal analyst, Enrique Latoison. Thanks for being here, Enrique. We have an outcome today. A year ago, we did not. Guilty on all counts. And after that guilty verdict, we heard about Bill Cosby's outburst in court. as the district attorney was arguing, his bail should be revoked and he should be sent to jail today. And the district attorney arguing he has a plane, he has money. We've heard all about that. And the comedian lashing out at the district attorney in front of the judge, in front of the whole court, saying, I don't have a plane, and used an expletive in referring to the district attorney. What's the impact of that outburst, do you think, when it comes to sentencing, if any?
Well, Jim, you can bet that the district attorney in sentencing is going to mention that again. He's going to remind the judge how Mr. Cosby acted, how he disrespected the court, and how he cursed in open court. That's a bad thing. I'm sure his defense attorneys, Mr. Cosby's attorneys, cautioned him not to have these kind of outbursts. It looks very, very bad. This is not something you want to do in front of the judge.
Each count, as we've mentioned, carries a maximum sentence of 10 years. There are 3 counts. It's going to be 30 to 90 days, I think, is it 60 to 90 days when we will be at sentencing, when the judge will decide what that sentence is. There's been some discussion that some of these counts could be merged. So how would that work?
So they have 90 days to sentence him by law, and the defense or the prosecution can ask for goodwill to ask for that to be delayed if they need more evidence. Now, if there's one act but multiple subsections apply, and now in this case he's got one act he's actually accused of doing, but the way it's broken down is 3 different subsections. The defense can argue for that to merge, and if it merges into one charge, his maximum penalty could be 5 to 10 years, a minimum of 5 years, a maximum of 10, instead of a minimum of 15 years to a maximum of 30 years.
We heard the judge mention today, when the argument was made by the district attorney to revoke his bail, I'm not going to do that to a man of this age and in his condition. Is that a signal that this judge is going to take that into account when it comes to what kind of sentence he gives Bill Cosby?
Well, it's always a good sign when you don't go to jail right after a guilty verdict. I will say that. But I will also say the judge is saying that, he's going to take all the proper information, all the different things into account, and then he's going to make that decision down the road.
All right, so we know Bill Cosby must remain here in Pennsylvania. He surrendered his passport. The judge told him you have to stay at home. So he awaits this. There are going to be some court hearings to come, and sort of a mini trial, as you said,
yes,
before the sentence is handed down. So we'll, of course, be awaiting that. And that's the latest here from the Montgomery County Courthouse. Send it back to Jacqueline Lund and Aaron Coleman in our NBC 10 studios.
A lot of variables with the appeal and sentencing. We will await the outcome of that with future court dates.
Absolutely, Jim. Thank you. We'll check back in.
Andrea Klein-Thomas here. Appreciate it. And I'm joined once again by our legal analyst here at NBC 10, Enrique Latoison. Let's talk about what Bill Cosby can and can't do right now. The judge is taking his passport, saying he must remain here in the Commonwealth. Can he leave home for any reason?
Well, typically how it works is that you're allowed to leave between certain hours to maybe run errands and do things of a personal nature. You can't leave the state, cannot leave the country, and it has to be things that are important. Sometimes they make sure you're there either by electronic device that they put on your ankle, or sometimes they do a phone call check-in where you have to answer the phone between certain hours to make sure that you are there.
But obviously this severely limits what he can and can't do. He can't travel out of state. He can't go to New York, where he also has a home. He can't do any of that until the sentencing takes place. And let's talk about the factors that would come into play when the judge weighs what the sentence should be. There will be obviously several reports that are done that the judge will consider. Talk to us about what's in those reports. What do they take into account?
Well, those reports will take into account his prior history. They will take in his current health. They will take in things about him and different things that are going on with him. They're going to take in a place, they have the sexual predator report that he has to do to see whether or not he's considered a violent person. All these things come into account. Now, a judge has to put on the record the reasons for his sentencing and the things that he's relying on. So the defense is going to have an opportunity to put on a mini trial and to tell the judge why they believe he should not be incarcerated. The prosecution is going to get that same chance. They'll be able to put on witnesses and they'll be able to tell the court why they believe that Mr. Cosby should be put in jail.
Is it possible at this sentencing phase that we will hear from other women? Would the prosecutor be able to put other women on the stand once again to talk about a pattern of behavior?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I believe they will do that. They will give these women a voice. and they were given an opportunity to tell the judge what happened to them and why, the things that affected their life and why Mr. Cosby should be jailed for that.
Now, it would not necessarily be the same 5 who testified at trial, would it?
No, not necessarily.
Yeah.
They can bring in other people that this affected and other women that accused him. This is a sentencing phase. It pretty much becomes wide open. It's like a similar Nassar, sentencing that took place with the gymnastics. You saw there were many women that came in and testified, even though only a couple were the actual people that he was being convicted of.
All right, Enrique Latoison, we appreciate your insights as always. Thanks for being here throughout this deliberation phase and today's guilty verdict. Appreciate it. NBC 10, of course, was the first to break this story on air and online. Major court victory for the Me Too movement, as we've been mentioning. You can download the NBC 10 app for a deeper look at the reaction and what it might mean for other cases. But for now, we want to send it back to the studios and Jack.
All right, Jim Rosenfield reporting live in Norristown. We'll check back in.